I began to realize that the question was never whether humanity would reach a turning point. The question was whether we would recognize it when it arrived. For thousands of years, generation after generation looked toward the future, carrying the same quiet hope that one day humanity would understand itself. Not merely through technology, not through power, not through the accumulation of knowledge, but through a deeper awareness of what it actually means to be human. Today, something remarkable is happening. For the first time in recorded history, ancient insights about consciousness are colliding with discoveries emerging from neuroscience, biology, psychology, and physics. Ideas once preserved in stories, symbols, and observations are now being examined through instruments, laboratories, and measurable data. And while the details are often debated, the larger pattern is difficult to ignore. We are beginning to discover that the human experience may be far more interconnected than we once believed. I often think about how most of us were taught to see ourselves. We learned to think of the body as one system, the mind as another, emotions as something separate, and the world around us as an external environment that simply happens to us. But what if that picture is incomplete? What if our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and physical biology are participating in a continuous conversation? Imagine standing beside a still lake. A single pebble falls into the water. The ripple expands outward. Now imagine dropping thousands of pebbles at once. Patterns emerge. Waves interact. Some strengthen one another. Others cancel each other out. The surface becomes a living network of movement. Human experience may function in a surprisingly similar way. Every thought creates a response. Every emotional state influences perception. Every perception affects behavior. Every behavior shapes future experiences. And those experiences reinforce the beliefs that generated them in the first place. Without realizing it, many of us spend years living inside feedback loops that feel completely real because we have forgotten that we helped create them. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. The moment we recognize that perception influences reality, a new possibility emerges. We gain the ability to examine the stories running beneath the surface of our lives. Because beliefs are strange things. Most people think they consciously choose them. In reality, many beliefs arrive long before conscious awareness develops. They are inherited from families, absorbed from culture, repeated through education, strengthened by experience. Over time, they become invisible, not because they are true, but because they become familiar. And familiarity often disguises itself as truth. I have noticed something fascinating when observing human behavior. People can encounter the exact same situation and walk away with completely different experiences. One person sees opportunity, another sees danger. One sees possibility, another sees limitation. The external event remains identical, yet the internal interpretation changes everything. This raises an extraordinary question. How much of reality are we actually experiencing? And how much are we filtering? Modern neuroscience suggests that the brain processes enormous amounts of information every second, far more than conscious awareness can handle. To function efficiently, the mind filters, it selects, it prioritizes, it creates models. In other words, what we experience is not necessarily reality itself. It is reality translated through perception. That realization changes the way I view personal transformation. Because transformation may not begin by changing the world around us. It may begin by changing the lens through which we observe it. A subtle shift in perspective can alter emotional responses. New emotional responses can influence biological processes. Different biological states can change behavior, and behavior ultimately shapes outcomes. This is where the conversation becomes especially interesting. For centuries, emotions were often viewed as secondary to rational thought. Today, researchers increasingly recognize that emotions are not merely reactions. They are information. They are signals. They are powerful biological events. When we experience fear, stress hormones flood the body. Heart rhythms change. Breathing patterns shift. Attention narrows. The entire system reorganizes itself, around survival. When we experience gratitude, connection, compassion, or genuine appreciation, very different biological responses emerge. Different chemicals circulate, different neural pathways activate, different physiological patterns appear. The body listens to emotional experience, and it responds accordingly. This does not mean positive thinking magically solves every problem. Reality is far more complex than simplistic slogans. But it does suggest something profound. The emotional environment we cultivate internally may influence the physical environment we experience externally. And if that's true, then emotional mastery becomes far more than a self-help concept. It becomes a practical skill, a form of inner technology. One of the most overlooked abilities human beings possess is the capacity to consciously direct attention. Attention is energy. Where attention goes, resources follow. Neural activity follows. Behavior follows. Life often follows. Yet in a world saturated with distractions, many people no longer choose where their attention rests. Attention is constantly being captured, pulled, fragmented, scattered across countless demands. The result is a population that often feels exhausted without understanding why. Because attention is not infinite, it is one of our most valuable resources. Every moment spent dwelling on fear is a moment unavailable for creativity. Every moment trapped in resentment is a moment unavailable for growth. Every moment lost in endless noise is a moment unavailable for insight. I sometimes wonder if one of the greatest challenges facing our generation is not technological. It is attentional. Can we remain present long enough to hear ourselves think? Can we create enough silence to notice what has been quietly shaping our lives beneath conscious awareness? Because beneath the surface noise, something important is happening. Many people are beginning to sense that the old models of identity no longer feel sufficient. The idea that we are merely isolated individuals competing for limited resources seems increasingly disconnected from lived experience. Across disciplines, evidence continues to emerge showing how deeply interconnected human systems truly are. Our biology responds to relationships. Our emotions influence communication. Our expectations shape interactions. Communities affect health. Meaning affects resilience. Connection affects well-being. The boundaries we assume are rigid often appear far more permeable than we imagine. And perhaps this is why so many people today feel both uncertainty and possibility at the same time. Old assumptions are dissolving. New understandings are emerging. We stand between two stories. One story says human beings are fundamentally limited by circumstances. The other suggests that awareness itself may be one of the most transformative forces available to us. The tension between those stories is unfolding right now inside individuals, families, institutions, and cultures around the world. What makes this moment unique is not simply the amount of information available. Humanity has accumulated information before. What makes this moment different is that we are beginning to ask a deeper question. Not what can we build, not what can we control, but what are we capable of becoming? And when I follow that question to its edge, I find myself returning to an observation that seems almost impossible to ignore. The greatest breakthroughs in human history rarely began with new tools. They began with new ways of seeing. And if that pattern holds true today, then the real transformation waiting for this generation may have far less to do with changing the external world than it does with discovering a hidden capacity that has been quietly developing within us all along. A capacity that becomes visible only when we begin to understand the surprising relationship between consciousness itself and the reality we experience every day. Because once that relationship becomes clear, an entirely new possibility starts to emerge. Because once that relationship becomes clear, an entirely new possibility starts to emerge. I believe this is where the conversation becomes far more personal. It is easy to explore consciousness as an abstract idea. We can discuss theories, studies, observations, and philosophical questions for hours, but eventually every discussion returns to the same place: our own lives. The way we think when nobody is watching. The stories we tell ourselves in moments of uncertainty.
the emotions we carry from one day into the next.
This is where consciousness stops being a concept and becomes an experience. And perhaps one of the most fascinating discoveries is that much of our daily behavior unfolds automatically. Research suggests that a significant portion of our actions, reactions, and decisions occur beneath conscious awareness. Patterns established years earlier continue operating in the background, influencing choices before we even realize a choice exists. I sometimes imagine it like walking through an unfamiliar city while wearing glasses, tinted a specific color. After a while, the tint becomes invisible. The world simply appears to be that color. Only when the glasses are removed do we recognize how much they were affecting everything we saw. Our beliefs often function the same way. Many of the limits we accept are not objective barriers. They are interpretations that became so familiar we stopped questioning them. A person who repeatedly hears that success belongs to others may unconsciously avoid opportunities. Someone convinced that relationships always lead to disappointment may unknowingly create distance whenever genuine connection appears. Another person may carry an identity built around struggle so deeply that peace itself feels uncomfortable. The remarkable part is that these patterns can persist even when circumstances change. The external world may offer new possibilities, yet the internal model continues predicting old outcomes. And because perception influences behavior, those expectations often recreate the very experiences they anticipate. This is one reason genuine transformation can feel challenging. Changing circumstances is sometimes easier than changing identity. A new job can be acquired, a new city can be chosen, a new routine can be established, but changing the unconscious assumptions through which reality is interpreted requires a different kind of work. It requires awareness, not force, not resistance, awareness. The moment we observe a pattern without immediately becoming trapped inside it, something extraordinary happens. A small space appears, and inside that space exists freedom. Freedom to choose a different response. Freedom to interrupt an old cycle. Freedom to experiment with a new possibility. This may sound simple, but its implications are profound. Because every major shift in human behavior begins with awareness. Before we can change a habit, we must notice it. Before we can release a fear, we must recognize it. Before we can transform a belief, we must first see that it exists. And this is where ancient wisdom and modern science unexpectedly begin speaking a similar language. Both point toward the importance of observation. Whether through contemplation, reflection, mindfulness, self-inquiry, or psychological research, a common theme emerges. Awareness changes experience, not because awareness magically alters reality, but because awareness changes our relationship to reality. The observer becomes an active participant. The person who notices their anger gains options unavailable to the person consumed by it. The individual who recognizes fear can respond differently than the individual unconsciously driven by fear. The moment awareness enters the process, new outcomes become possible. What fascinates me most is that human beings appear uniquely equipped for this kind of self-reflection. We can think about our thoughts. We can observe our emotions. We can examine our assumptions. We can imagine futures that do not yet exist. Few abilities are more powerful, yet many people underestimate them because these capacities are invisible. You cannot hold awareness in your hand. You cannot measure imagination with a ruler. You cannot photograph meaning. And yet these unseen forces shape civilizations. Every invention began as an idea. Every movement began as a vision. Every transformation began as a possibility that existed nowhere except within human consciousness. Before a bridge spans a river, it exists in the mind. Before a solution changes the world, it exists as a thought. Before a new future emerges, someone must first imagine it. This suggests something remarkable about the era we are living through. The greatest resource of the future may not be material. It may be human consciousness itself. Not consciousness in a mystical sense. Consciousness as creativity, as adaptability, as insight, as emotional intelligence. as the ability to navigate complexity while remaining deeply human. Because the challenges facing our generation are unlike those faced by many who came before us. We are surrounded by more information than any civilization in history. Yet information alone does not create wisdom. In some cases, it creates confusion. Knowledge can tell us what is happening. Wisdom helps us understand what it means, and meaning may be one of the most important human needs of all. People can endure extraordinary difficulties when they find meaning within them. Without meaning, even comfort can feel empty. This may explain why so many individuals today are searching for something they struggle to describe. They are not necessarily searching for more possessions, or more entertainment, or more distractions. They are searching for coherence, for connection, for a deeper understanding of how their lives fit into a larger story. Because beneath our differences, there is a common human longing. We want our lives to matter. We want our experiences to mean something. We want to know that our existence contributes to something larger than our individual concerns. And perhaps this is where the idea of a generational turning point becomes especially relevant. What if this generation is not being asked merely to consume information? What if it is being asked to integrate it? To bridge knowledge and wisdom, technology and humanity, logic and intuition, science and lived experience. For centuries, many forms of knowledge evolved in separate directions. Now those streams appear to be converging. The questions once asked by philosophers are increasingly explored by neuroscientists. The observations once preserved through storytelling are being examined through data. Fields that once seemed disconnected are beginning to reveal surprising overlaps. And at the center of this convergence stands a question that feels more relevant than ever. Who are we, really? Not our job titles, not our social identities, not the roles we perform. Who are we beneath all of those layers? When the noise settles, when expectations fade, when inherited assumptions are examined, what remains? I suspect this question matters because the answer influences everything else. The future we create depends upon how we define ourselves. If we see ourselves as powerless, our actions reflect powerlessness. If we see ourselves as disconnected, our systems reflect disconnection. But if we begin to recognize our capacity for awareness, creativity, compassion, and conscious choice, then entirely different possibilities emerge. And perhaps that is why this moment feels so significant. Not because history guarantees a transformation. History guarantees nothing. The opportunity exists, but the outcome remains unwritten. The next chapter depends on millions of individual choices unfolding in countless ordinary moments. Choices about attention, choices about perception, choices about fear, choices about possibility, choices about who we become when circumstances challenge us, because every generation inherits a world shaped by those who came before. But occasionally, a generation encounters something different, a moment when inherited assumptions no longer provide adequate answers, a moment when old maps no longer match the terrain, a moment when humanity is invited to rethink its understanding of itself. And if that is truly where we stand today, then the most important question may not be whether change is coming. The evidence suggests it already is. The deeper question is whether we are prepared to participate in that change consciously. Because the emerging discoveries about human perception, collective behavior, and the hidden influence of emotional states are beginning to reveal something that could fundamentally reshape how we understand the relationship between the inner world and the world we appear to share. Because the emerging discoveries about human perception, collective behavior, and the hidden influence of emotional states are beginning to reveal something that could fundamentally reshape how we understand the relationship between the inner world and the world we appear to share. For most of history, the boundary between inside and outside seemed obvious. There was me, and there was everything else. My thoughts belonged to my mind. My emotions belonged to my body. The world existed independently beyond both. It felt simple, clear, undeniable. Yet the more closely we examine human experience, the more complex that boundary appears to become. Consider something as ordinary as a conversation. Two people enter the same room. The words exchanged may be identical, yet the experience can be completely different depending on the emotional state each person brings with them. A worried mind hears criticism where none was intended. A confident mind hears opportunity. A fearful person notices threats. A hopeful person notices possibilities. The environment remains the same. The interpretation changes, and that interpretation influences behavior. Behavior influences relationships. Relationships influence outcomes. Outcomes reinforce beliefs. A private inner state begins shaping external reality in ways that are subtle yet profound. What fascinates me is how often this process occurs without our awareness. We assume we are responding to the world as it is. In many cases, we are responding to the world as we perceive it. The distinction matters, because if perception influences experience, then understanding perception becomes one of the most important skills a human being can develop. I sometimes think of consciousness as a kind of lens, not a passive lens, an active one. It does not merely observe reality. It organizes experience. It highlights certain information while filtering other information away. It assigns meaning, creates narratives, forms expectations, and those expectations quietly guide our behavior. This helps explain why two people can live through similar circumstances and emerge with entirely different conclusions about life. One discovers resilience, another discovers helplessness. One develops trust, another develops suspicion. The event may be the same. The meaning extracted from it becomes radically different. Over time, those meanings accumulate, layer upon layer, year after year, until they become part of our identity. And identity is powerful, perhaps more powerful than most people realize, because human beings often behave in ways that preserve their identity even when that identity creates suffering. Someone who sees themselves as unlucky may unconsciously overlook opportunities. Someone who identifies as a victim may struggle to recognize their own agency. Someone who believes they are incapable may avoid experiences that could prove otherwise. The mind seeks consistency, even when consistency limits growth. This is why transformation frequently feels uncomfortable. Growth requires us to question assumptions that once felt certain, and certainty is comforting, even when it is inaccurate. The unknown demands courage, not because it guarantees success, but because it requires us to leave familiar territory. Every meaningful transformation begins this way. Not with answers, with questions. Questions that disrupt old patterns. Questions that challenge inherited beliefs. Questions that create enough space for a new perspective to emerge. What if I am more capable than I assume? What if my limitations are not as fixed as they appear? What if my current experience represents a chapter rather than a final destination? Questions like these have extraordinary power because they redirect attention. And where attention goes, possibility follows. I believe this is one reason curiosity is so important. Curiosity opens doors that certainty keeps closed. The curious mind remains flexible, adaptable, alive. It explores, investigates, experiments. The certain mind often stops looking. It assumes it already knows. And in doing so, it may miss possibilities that exist directly in front of it. Throughout history, some of humanity's greatest breakthroughs emerged because someone was willing to question what everyone else accepted. Not because they possessed all the answers, because they were willing to ask different questions. The same principle applies to personal transformation. A single question can alter the trajectory of a life. A single realization can shift years of habitual thinking. A single moment of awareness can interrupt a pattern that has operated for decades. And when enough individuals experience these shifts simultaneously, something larger begins to happen. Cultures evolve. values change, priorities transform. History itself takes a new direction. This is why I find the present moment so fascinating. We often hear about technological revolutions, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, quantum computing, automation, communication networks. These developments are undeniably significant, but beneath them lies another revolution that receives far less attention, a revolution in human self-understanding. For perhaps the first time on a global scale, millions of people are beginning to ask deeper questions about consciousness, meaning emotional well-being and human potential. Not because someone instructed them to, because existing answers increasingly feel incomplete. Material progress has improved countless aspects of life. Yet many people continue searching for something beyond efficiency and convenience, something that technology alone cannot provide: a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. And perhaps this search reflects something fundamental about human nature. We are not merely problem-solving machines. We are meaning-making beings. We want our experiences to fit into a coherent story. We want to understand who we are and why our lives matter. Without that understanding, even achievement can feel strangely hollow. I have often noticed that the moments people remember most rarely involve possessions. They remember connection, growth, discovery, love, creativity, contribution, moments when they felt deeply alive, moments when they sensed that something larger was unfolding through them. This observation raises an intriguing possibility. What if human fulfillment depends less on what we accumulate and more on how consciously we participate in life? What if the quality of our awareness shapes the quality of our experience? If that is true, then consciousness is not merely an interesting topic, it becomes central. Because every experience passes through awareness. Every perception, every emotion, every thought, every memory. Awareness is the medium through which life is lived, and yet most of us spend years exploring the external world, while knowing very little about the internal processes shaping our experience of it. We learn how to navigate cities, operate technology, manage finances, build careers, but few people are taught how attention works, how beliefs form, how emotional patterns develop, how perception influences behavior, how identity evolves. These invisible forces often determine the trajectory of our lives far more than we realize. Perhaps this is why so many ancient traditions emphasize self-knowledge, not as an abstract philosophy, as a practical necessity, because without self-awareness, we risk becoming passengers in patterns we do not understand. With awareness, we become participants, creators, observers capable of choosing new directions. And this may be the deeper significance of the era we are entering. Not that humanity is suddenly acquiring new abilities, but that we are beginning to recognize abilities that have been present all along. The capacity for self-reflection, the capacity for conscious choice, the capacity to reshape identity, the capacity to transform perception, the capacity to influence not only how we experience reality, but how we contribute to the reality others experience as well. Because every thought influences action. Every action influences relationships. Every relationship influences communities. And communities ultimately shape civilizations. Which means the future may be influenced far more by the evolution of human consciousness than most people currently imagine. And if that is true, then one of the most important discoveries this generation can make is that the transformation of the world and the transformation of the self may not be separate journeys at all. In fact, they may be different expressions of the same process, one that becomes visible only when we begin examining the surprising ways individual awareness contributes to collective reality, and how countless personal shifts occurring beneath the surface of everyday life may already be setting the stage for a change far larger than most people have yet recognized. And how countless personal shifts occurring beneath the surface of everyday life may already be setting the stage for a change far larger than most people have yet recognized. The most profound transformations rarely announce themselves. They do not arrive with a dramatic signal or a universally recognized beginning. Instead, they emerge quietly, almost invisibly. A new idea appears in one mind. A new perspective takes root in another. Small conversations begin happening in homes, classrooms, workplaces, and communities. At first, nothing seems different. The world looks the same. Daily routines continue. Life moves forward as it always has. Yet beneath the surface, something is changing. History is filled with examples of this phenomenon. The moments we later identify as turning points often seemed ordinary while they were unfolding. People living through them rarely understood their significance at the time. Only in retrospect did the pattern become visible. Only later did they realize they had been standing inside a transformation. I sometimes wonder if our generation is experiencing something similar, not merely a technological shift, not merely a social shift, but a shift in awareness itself, a gradual recognition that the way we understand human potential may be expanding. For a long time, progress was measured primarily through external achievements. Bigger cities, faster transportation, more powerful machines, greater access to information. These developments change civilization in extraordinary ways. But external progress does not automatically create internal growth. A society can become technologically advanced while remaining emotionally fragmented. Information can increase while wisdom stagnates. Knowledge can expand while self-understanding remains limited. Perhaps this is why so many people today feel an unusual tension. On one hand, humanity possesses capabilities previous generations could barely imagine. On the other hand, many individuals continue struggling with anxiety, disconnection, uncertainty, and a lack of meaning. The contrast is striking. We have unprecedented access to the outer world, yet many are searching for a deeper connection to their inner world. And that search appears to be accelerating. Across cultures and age groups, more people are questioning assumptions that once seemed unquestionable. They are examining the nature of attention, exploring emotional intelligence, investigating consciousness, looking beyond surface-level explanations, seeking a more complete understanding of what it means to be human. This curiosity is significant because curiosity often precedes transformation. Before a new possibility can be realized, it must first be imagined. Before a new understanding can emerge, existing assumptions must be examined. Before change becomes visible externally, it usually begins internally. The process resembles the growth of a seed. For a long time, nothing appears to happen. Beneath the soil, however, complex activity is taking place. Roots form, structures develop, energy accumulates, preparation occurs out of sight. Then one day, a visible breakthrough appears to an outside observer. The change seems sudden. In reality, it was unfolding long before it became visible. Human transformation often follows the same pattern. Years of reflection may precede a moment of clarity. Countless small choices may precede a major life change. Invisible growth eventually becomes visible growth. And perhaps the same principle applies collectively. What if the shifts occurring within millions of individuals are preparing the foundation for broader societal changes? What if the future is being shaped not only by institutions and technologies, but also by the evolving consciousness of ordinary people? This possibility becomes especially interesting when we consider the power of collective beliefs. Every society operates according to shared assumptions. Some assumptions concern economics, others concern education, others concern relationships, success, health, or human nature itself. These assumptions influence behavior on a massive scale. When enough people believe something is possible, resources move toward it. Attention gathers around it. Effort organizes around it. Eventually, reality begins reflecting those shared expectations. The opposite is also true. Ideas perceived as impossible often remain unrealized, not because they are inherently impossible, but because few people invest energy into exploring them. This suggests that collective perception may play a larger role in shaping the future than we typically acknowledge. The stories a civilization tells itself matter. The beliefs a culture embraces matter. The vision people hold about humanity matters because those beliefs influence decisions. and decisions create outcomes. If we collectively view human beings as fundamentally limited, our systems will reflect limitation. If we view people as adaptable, creative, and capable of growth, our institutions may begin reflecting those qualities instead. In this sense, every generation participates in an ongoing conversation about what humanity is. And perhaps our generation is being invited to ask a new question. Not what are humans capable of controlling, but what are humans capable of becoming? The difference is subtle, yet profound. Control focuses on the external. Becoming focuses on the internal. Control seeks domination. Becoming seeks development. Control asks how much power we can acquire. Becoming asks how much wisdom we can embody. As I reflect on the challenges facing our world, I find this distinction increasingly important. Many of our greatest problems cannot be solved through technology alone. Technology can amplify human intention, but it cannot determine what that intention should be. It can connect people, but it cannot guarantee understanding. It can provide information, but it cannot create wisdom. Those qualities emerge from consciousness, from awareness, from values, from the choices individuals make every day. This realization brings us back to something surprisingly simple. The future is not created only by extraordinary events. It is created by ordinary moments. Moments when people choose compassion instead of hostility. Moments when curiosity replaces certainty. Moments when awareness interrupts unconscious reactions. Moments when individuals act from their highest understanding rather than their deepest fears. These moments may seem insignificant, yet collectively they shape the emotional and psychological climate of entire communities. And communities influence nations. Nations influence history. The ripple effects extend farther than we often realize. This is why personal transformation and collective transformation may be inseparable. The two processes continuously influence one another. The individual shapes the collective. The collective shapes the individual. A dynamic relationship exists between them. Neither operates in isolation, and perhaps this interconnectedness explains why periods of uncertainty often precede major breakthroughs. When old systems no longer provide adequate answers, discomfort emerges, confusion increases, tension rises, the future feels unclear. Yet uncertainty also creates opportunity, because uncertainty loosens the grip of outdated assumptions. It creates space for new possibilities to enter. Many of the structures humanity takes for granted today were born during periods of profound uncertainty. New ways of thinking emerged because existing frameworks could no longer explain what people were experiencing. The same pattern may be unfolding again. The questions confronting our generation are not merely technical. They are deeply human. What creates meaning? What creates resilience? What allows individuals and societies to thrive? How do we navigate complexity without losing our humanity? How do we cultivate wisdom in an age overflowing with information? And perhaps most importantly, what hidden capacities remain dormant within us, waiting to be recognized? Because every era tends to underestimate the potential of the people living within it. Future generations often look back and wonder why certain possibilities were not obvious. Yet those possibilities were invisible until someone learned how to see them. Which brings us to an extraordinary possibility. The greatest discovery of this century may not be found in a laboratory, a computer, or a distant corner of the universe. It may emerge from a deeper understanding of the human mind itself, an understanding that reveals how awareness shapes perception, how perception shapes reality, and how reality itself may be influenced by patterns of thought and emotion in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. And if that understanding continues to evolve, it could fundamentally alter how we approach education, health, relationships, leadership, creativity, and even our understanding of what it means to participate consciously in the unfolding story of humanity. Because the deeper we look into the nature of consciousness, the more we encounter a mystery that challenges some of our oldest assumptions about who we are and why we are here at this particular moment in history.
One of the most important ideas explored in this discussion is the relationship between consciousness and perception. These are words we hear often, but many people never stop to ask what they actually mean in everyday life. Let's begin with a simple observation. Imagine two people standing outside on a rainy day. One person looks at the rain and feels frustrated. They see cancelled plans, inconvenience, and discomfort. The other person sees nourishment for the earth, a chance to slow down, and an opportunity to enjoy a quiet moment indoors. The rain itself is identical. The difference lies in perception. This simple example reveals something profound about human experience. We do not merely react to reality, we react to our interpretation of reality. Modern neuroscience helps explain why this happens. Our brains receive an overwhelming amount of information every second. If we consciously processed every sound, sight, sensation, memory, and detail around us, we would quickly become overwhelmed. To solve this problem, the brain acts like a filter. Think of it like a search engine. When you type a specific phrase into a search engine, it doesn't show you everything on the internet. It shows you information related to what you're looking for. Your brain works in a similar way. If you believe the world is dangerous, your mind becomes highly skilled at finding evidence that supports that belief. If you believe opportunities exist everywhere, your mind becomes more likely to notice possibilities. Neither person is necessarily seeing the complete picture. They are seeing the portion of reality their mental filters allow them to notice. This doesn't mean reality is imaginary. It means perception influences experience. And this is where self-awareness becomes incredibly valuable. Most people spend years trying to change their circumstances without examining the lens through which they view those circumstances. Yet, often, transformation begins with awareness. A practical exercise you can try is simple. The next time you feel stressed, upset, or discouraged, pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling myself right now? Notice that the question is not what is happening. The question is what story am I creating about what is happening? This small shift can reveal hidden assumptions that influence your emotions and decisions. Another major theme in the script is the connection between emotions and the body. For many years, emotions were treated as secondary to logic. Today, science increasingly shows that emotions play a crucial role in our physical and mental well-being. Think about what happens when you're nervous before an important presentation. Your heart rate increases, your breathing changes, your muscles become tense, your palms may sweat. A thought creates an emotional response, and that emotional response triggers physical changes throughout the body. The reverse is also true. Changing your physical state can influence your emotional state. A slow, deep breath sends different signals to the nervous system than rapid, shallow breathing. Standing upright creates a different internal experience than slouching. Spending time in nature often produces different emotional responses than spending hours in a stressful environment. This reminds us that the mind and body are not separate systems. They are partners engaged in a continuous conversation. One practical technique is to develop a daily awareness practice. This doesn't need to be complicated. Spend 5 minutes each day sitting quietly. Pay attention to your breathing. Notice your thoughts without trying to control them. Observe your emotions without judging them. The goal is not to stop thinking. The goal is to become aware of what is happening within you. Over time, this simple practice strengthens your ability to observe rather than automatically react. And that ability can transform nearly every area of life. The script also explores the idea of identity. This is one of the most powerful concepts we can understand. Most people think they make decisions based solely on logic. In reality, many decisions are influenced by identity. For example, imagine someone who deeply believes they are not good with money. Even if they learn excellent financial strategies, that identity may continue influencing their choices. Or imagine someone who believes they are not a confident person. They may unconsciously avoid opportunities that could help them build confidence. Identity acts like an invisible operating system running in the background. This is why lasting transformation often requires more than changing behavior. It requires examining the beliefs that define who we think we are. One useful question to ask yourself is this belief a fact, or is it a story I have repeated for so long that it feels like a fact? Many limitations begin to loosen when we honestly explore that question. Another fascinating concept is attention. Attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Yet most people give it away without realizing it. Imagine attention as sunlight. Whatever receives sunlight grows. If you constantly focus on fear, fear grows. If you constantly focus on problems, problems occupy more mental space. If you intentionally focus on learning, creativity, gratitude, or meaningful goals, those qualities become stronger. This doesn't mean ignoring challenges. It means consciously deciding where your mental energy goes. A practical habit is to begin each morning by asking, what deserves my attention today? Not what demands it, not what competes for it, what truly deserves it. That simple distinction can dramatically improve clarity and focus. Perhaps the deepest lesson in all of this is that consciousness is not merely an abstract topic reserved for philosophers or scientists. It is the foundation of daily life. Every experience passes through awareness. Every relationship, every decision, every success, every setback. The quality of your awareness influences the quality of your experience. This realization can be empowering. It reminds us that growth does not always require dramatic life changes. Often it begins with small shifts, a moment of self-observation, a conscious breath, a new perspective, a willingness to question an old belief, a deliberate choice about where to place attention. These actions may appear small, but they create ripple effects. Just as a tiny seed contains the blueprint for a massive tree, small moments of awareness contain the potential for profound transformation. And perhaps that is one of the most important insights we can take from this discussion. Human potential is not something that suddenly appears one day. It unfolds gradually through awareness, intention, and practice. Every moment offers an opportunity to become a little more conscious, a little more present, and a little more aligned with the person you wish to become. The future of humanity may indeed depend on technological innovation, scientific breakthroughs, and social progress. But it also depends on something deeply personal, our willingness to understand ourselves. Because the more clearly we understand our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and patterns, the more capable we become of shaping our lives intentionally rather than unconsciously. And when enough individuals begin that journey, personal transformation can grow into collective transformation, creating a future shaped not only by what we know, but by the wisdom with which we choose to live.